Good evening, welcome. I'm going to get started. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Lilah Anderson. I'm the director of the Anderson Gallery downstairs, and happy to have Jill Wells here for a conversation this evening. I think many of you know Jill, but I want to give you some bio and background about her. She is an alum of Drake University. She's an Iowa-based interdisciplinary artist, advocate, and mentor. Before establishing her full-time studio practice, she worked as a certified alcohol and substance abuse counselor for the state of Iowa from 2014 to 2020. Jill has exhibited nationally and internationally, including solo and group shows at Woman Made Gallery, Art Gallery, Logia Gallery in Chicago, the Dubuque Museum of Art, the Des Moines Art Center, Museum of Art Cedar Rapids, the Lux Center for the Arts in Lincoln, Nebraska, and the International Convention Center in Belfast, Northern Ireland. In 2023, Wells created Iowa's first tactile mural and 3D mural model plaque for Martin Luther King Elementary School in Des Moines, which I think maybe we'll talk about a little bit in our conversation. And as the first artist and fellow of color for the Harkin Institute, she represented the United States and the state of Iowa in the United Nations in Austria. She also participated in a 2022 conversation on art, advocacy, and revolution at Al-Quds Bard College for the Arts and Sciences in Jerusalem, Palestine. That same year, she was a TEDx speaker on the power of public art. Her honors include a 2024 TAN Foundation Award, the 2025 Iowa Artist Fellowship, the David Hurd Innovator in the Arts Award, among others. Wells is the co-founder and lead mentor of the Freedom of Expression Project, and she serves on the board of the Greater Des Moines Public Art Foundation, Mainframe Studios, and After School Arts Program. That's a lot of boards to be on. 3. Whew. She maintains a full-time studio practice here in Des Moines, Iowa. I'm thrilled to have Jill here for the conversation tonight, as well as, of course, with the beautiful site-specific installation that's downstairs. So for this evening, we will have our conversation here, and then we invite you to please join us in the gallery downstairs to see Jill's show if you have not already, and there's some refreshments downstairs as well. So as I mentioned in Jill's intro, you're an alum of Drake, and you actually did your BFA exhibition downstairs in the same gallery. At the time, your focus was more on painting. And so I wanted to talk in terms of materials, how your artistic practice has grown over time and led you to the current practice, specifically maybe the installation downstairs, and how you've expanded and changed the way you've worked with materials up till now. So I wanted to kind of start our conversation there.
So one of the parts of material that I often consider is accessibility. So I think anyone who knows me knows I'm kind of on this mission. And accessibility for me starts in public conversations, especially like this. So since we're doing a recording here and I don't always know who my audience is, I love to start with an introduction that gives an image description of myself. And so that usually starts something like this. I'm an African-American woman. I have short black hair. I'm wearing a black top. I have black slacks, and then I'm wearing sneakers tonight. And for folks who are online, who are living with visual impairments or blindness, this will provide for a level of accessibility, and identity and representation for me really matter. So oftentimes identifying of what I look like in my race is really, really important. And so you'll see me or hear me do that with slides as well. So kind of bear with me, the cadence might be a little bit different. And so for this first slide, in answering Lilah's question, it's a split screen. On the left, there is an image of a piece that I did here at Drake University, which is multiple mediums. There's painting in that, so my fine arts degree is in painting. Mm-hmm. And then the split screen on the right-hand side is kind of a close-up of some of the materials. So it's handmade black paper, there's gold wax, there's black thread, and then in text that's white, it says painted black love letters. And so it's part of a piece that I was commissioned to do here for Drake University. It's in the Salmons room over at the Cultural Center, and it was really part of Painted Black Love Letters. That was part of the Painted Black hashtag project here that kind of came from a former graduate, and her name is Morgan Coleman. So for me, painting was like my introduction to art. Mm-hmm. I was blessed to have access to a grandmother who loved art, believed in the power of art, and really believed in the power of community. and would take me to art classes when she was younger in a place in Indianola, Iowa, which is where I grew up. And I had some tremendous professors and educators and people in my life who really fostered the arts for me. And that led me to having a great sense of self-esteem and understanding what I was good at. And as a biracial person here in a predominantly white city in a predominantly white state, that was really important because outside of that, it was really hard for me to find a sense of what I was good at and self-esteem outside of the arts. So I believe in the power of that for so many different reasons. And here at Drake, I had an amazing professor. Her name was Angela Battle and Mara Lyons, who's with us tonight. Thomas Worthen was another professor of mine, and he has since transcended. These were individuals in my life who really pushed me to understand the history of art and the power of medium and materials. And I also had some amazing like fellow students, and one of them, her name was Tia here at Drake before I graduated in 2005. And she was majoring in painting, but she would do almost everything other than painting. And so her and Professor Battle would kind of go at it, but to have her in the studio with me was the first person who kind of introduced me to the idea of what painting could be aside from what it might traditionally be identified as or looked at as, and what material could stand in and start to talk about this is a painting, even though it's beyond acrylics or oils or acoustics or something like that. So over the years, I have found that being able to think about painting as a language and medium as a language is really how my practice shifted. And being able to use other mediums, or sometimes object just isn't enough. Those allow me to provide a greater access point into the narrative of the work and to understanding the work as well. So working across all those mediums.
Because I think some of the people here might know your work more potentially from murals that you've done, public murals. You have quite a few outside, some inside. I mentioned the one at the elementary school. But I think here it's interesting to see you kind of doing things that feel kind of painterly in a way, or utilizing the wall in a mural-like way, but with these other materials and kind of bringing those into your practice.
Yeah. And the scale for the space here, the Anderson Gallery, so it's 1,800 square feet. And for me, I'm used to working with scales that big. Like when I was in studio here before I graduated, I think the largest I went was 7 feet in length and maybe 4 feet or 5 feet in height. Even though I came in on a scholarship from a mural that I did at Creative Visions. So right out of high school, I had some really interesting community support in being able to work and scale and painting that took a lot of the fear out of a large scale work of art, and almost to the point where when I would scale back down, it was really uncomfortable working small again.
Yeah, and I feel like that kind of leads in. I want to start talking about the installation downstairs a little bit. So it really explores the senses in many ways. The lighting is blue. You can smell incense as you walk through the gallery. When Jill first did this, I walked in and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like, what's happened
What's incense?
here?
What's with the incense?
Like, what have you done to the gallery? But have come to gotten used to the Nag Champa in the Anderson Gallery and appreciate that as a sensory experience and very immersive quality in the installation. And I think too, like the curtain obscures the view, it sometimes directs the view. And to me, I find a very interesting play between saturation and also kind of deprivation of the sensory experience that you're exploring in the installation. So I wanted to have you talk a little bit about how you think about creating that sensory experience in the installation and a little bit more about the immersive quality that it has.
So there's some cryptic things within or embedded within the narrative of the space. And I often think about exhibitions as narrative making. And there's a lot of my experience with Black trauma, specifically trauma from work, trauma that has been more vicarious, that would be outside of work, that would be more shared experiences connected to my relationships or other folks. And I've been privileged to be able to hold some of those, and yet that does carry a weight. And oftentimes my experience in this state is one that is peculiar. And that's where the sensory side of the books kind of start to come in play. And there is a book in the very far back of the exhibition. It's The Soul of Black Folks, or The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. And that for me starts to kind of tell a little bit of the narrative about the kind of Black sheer there and this veil that Du Bois talks about, and identifying as an African American and then an American here in the West. And so a lot of those experiences growing up were almost, they were very much not talked about. And my father passed when I was 2, and that's my first point of trauma, and not understanding how my body held that trauma as I got older and older. There was just this strange longing for a father figure. And that manifested in a lot of different maladaptive behaviors. And I also know, having a child who's lost a parent that I've adopted, I see how the development is impacted, the development of our brains and our bodies when we have some of those either maternal or paternal figures that are gone early on. So the butterflies start to move across the walls on both sides in a mirrored pattern, and those are EEG brain trauma patterns. Another point of trauma within my life is my brother had a brain aneurysm when he was 18, and that was a really heavy brain trauma for him. He was in a coma for about 11 months, and I was just entering into Drake when I was here, and trying to figure out what his recovery would be like, but also learning that there was very peculiar parts of the healthcare system that were different for him as a man of color when receiving care in the state of Iowa, and probably one could say throughout the US. There's just very interesting ways that materials are created that are different for melanated skin than for non-melanated skin, and that's just an entry point on how one would receive care, let alone that it was always kind of strange that people would be like, well, why would you be interested in this, and not understanding that what they're saying is related to the race of who I am. All of those points of impact start to unfold within the exhibition in itself. And so that's a piece of that you're kind of asking about.
Yeah, and you already started to talk a little bit about the butterflies, but that was kind of another thing that I wanted to kind of elaborate on. The two sides of the gallery, they mirror each other. We see the butterflies flying in a pattern, and I feel like it's not immediately kind of like, you don't immediately see that they're in a pattern, and then as you kind of look closer and move further through, you start to sort of, they jump up at one point pretty high, and you feel like, oh, okay, maybe something's happening here, and then you notice kind of that they have this pattern, and then that pattern reoccurs on the transparencies that are in the back of the gallery. And you actually see this is a medical pattern, and it kind of becomes revealed what the pattern is that the butterflies are flying in. And I think it seems like something that's significant, right? That you've based the installation on this, and kind of let us in a way, you lead us through this space, but also at the same time kind of create a meditation or a space for meditation around that idea. And that, so yeah, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Well, for me, a lot of times those things are not visible, right? Until we kind of sit in dialogue and in conversation, which is one of the reasons why the room is hopefully kind of set up for that, where you could be encouraged to sit and be in dialogue either with yourself or another person, or with the text that's there, is because a lot of those things we just don't immediately see. They're not immediately visible right away with one-on-one encounters. And I've had those experiences where someone doesn't really know what's going on with me, and I don't really know what's going on with the other person. I think that leads to a lot of our disconnect as a society. And so I was curious, and I was really interested in how could I start to kind of mitigate that? How could I talk about some of those invisibilities or those kind of obscured things through material, and employing the material to start to maybe pique one's interest as to like, well, why? When you have something like Braille and then you remove the tactile nature of it, oftentimes there's this immediate reaction as that could be disrespectful. Why would you take away the access point? And for me, that allows like the inroad to the conversation. Well, why would one take away an access point? And when we can ask each other those questions or ask ourselves those questions, I think we might arrive at some of the answers that are the truth of the lived experiences and the world that we're in. And then we can start to ask, well, what do I want to do in response to that? Those answers, I think, could be some amazing solutions. And for me, that's where art has always allowed me to have the voice that is very difficult to have outside of the material. And you can usually spend longer time with the material than oftentimes you might have in conversation with someone. Or again, with yourself, you can come back to the material. Like we have these lives that ask us to go to work and to take care of the family and take care of the house. And we can't always be as focused in the healing process on ourselves or other people as we might like. And so for me, that material allows me to come back to it, and it's very therapeutic in that way.
Yeah. And I think I see that, and that's one of the ways I think that the curtain, that was something that, it was challenging to install that, but it was something that I felt like was really important to kind of create a sense of, disrupting views, but also creating them, kind of having it be sheer. You can see through it, but you also sort of can't all the time.
Yes.
And using material in a way to kind of direct different kind of experiences in the space.
On this slide, there is a small black pedestal kind of to the left, and there's a black vessel that holds the incense. There's black butterflies that are moving along the wall behind it, and then the entire vantage point is in blue light. So the blue light within the space was really something that was important to myself, and Lilah accommodated this in a way that was really almost otherworldly. So thank you so much for doing that.
Not to create the world, so.
I'm kind of a MacGyver. I just use what I have and I just put it all together. You know what I mean? And so when you're working with a team of people that's like, I'm going to take that on for you, to me, it's like a love language. It's an act of service that you provide. And I think for artists, that's really critical, especially in a state that's not really known for arts and culture. Like we really need the support and the kind of collective experience of creating these things together, because otherwise it can become very, very taxing. And you do end up finding a way, but sometimes it compromises. So I didn't have to do that for this one. And I really thank you for that.
As someone whose love language happens to be acts of service, I'm glad that I'm coming through. But no, I mean, when you talked about blue light, you had, we had come in and Jill had said, this is what I'd like to do. These are kind of my sketches. This is what I'm thinking. And blue light was part of that conversation. And I felt like, oh shit, okay. But I gotta make this happen, because it was an important part of transforming the space into a different feeling.
Mhm.
And I think also part of, for you, that was really key to having an area for reflection, for meditation, and so that felt important to figure out how to make it happen.
For me, was something that kind of came on in maybe like my late 30s, where I have a dear friend in the room in the back corner, Patrick, who led me into counseling, and I'm so grateful for that. And in those experiences, we would often do like one-on-ones, and we do motivational interviewing, and you do like these mock situations. And we'd have LED lights like this in the room. And I started getting ocular migraines, and I was sitting there and I was like trying to like have this really serious conversation. And it was like, I just saw it moving, this prism like across my eye, and it got bigger. It was so trippy. I was like trying to hold it together, what's going on. And so understanding how light affects me in that way, I started to also be curious, like who else is experiencing that? And then read and came across some amazing studies about de-escalation in classrooms. And I do a lot of public work in public schools. And light is a big thing. It's something that oftentimes is a very easy, accessible change and can shift the entire temperature, literally, of the room. and help mitigate behaviors that would be otherwise identified as disciplinary, and then someone would be removed from the school or the class or something like that. So it can be something you could play around with, and you can try shifting out the spectrums of the light within the room. And blue light therapy, even though like sometimes it looks like white light, is really great for seasonal affect disorder. And that's another thing I thought a lot about in thinking we're going into the winter here and we have a lot of lack of sunlight. Could this provide something for the students on campus, even though the spectrum's a little bit different, to see if they could go in there for, a couple minutes or half an hour and see if there was a shift in their kind of mood.
Absolutely. So you've already you talked about accessibility kind of right up front in the beginning, and that is clearly something that's really important to your practice, to your art making. And there's a lot of ways we've tried to make this exhibition accessible to all people. In the catalog, there's Braille text, we have Braille labels, there's audio descriptions for the show. We thought about layout and wheelchair accessibility within the space, among other things. And there's sensory elements. You can pick up the books. Mm-hmm. There's things that that are tactile and can be touched in the show. And even you talked about content a little bit, has Braille letters. So it's not only just about the accessibility of the show, but it's kind of bleeding into also the content of the work. And so I wanted you to talk a little bit about, prioritizing accessibility and how you think about that as part of your practice, both also like in content as well.
So in this slide, it shows almost the entire scale of the center part of the installation. There's black shears on the right and the left, and then there's a gap within those shears where accessibility can be to move between those spaces. And I often think of it as like these exterior hallways, and then there's like an interior courtyard. And so there's places to sit. There is turf that is actually safe for cochlear implants. So if you have one, it's not going to be staticky and throw it off. And then there's a couple different elements there that you can touch along the wall: books, Braille, some of the, I think, foliage is, you can kind of bend over and play with it. You can't hurt it any. It's not a monolithic type of a thing. But I think when you really love something, typically you're pretty critical of it. And I remember Jane Baldwin talking about that and his love for America. And that's how I feel about the arts. And that I knew as a young person that I had a privilege that not a lot of people had, which was access to the arts. I mean, for me, I understood that there was a lot of people that just didn't have family members that actually embraced or supported it as a career. I never had that problem. No one ever said, like, you can't go to school for this, or made me feel like it was going to be dangerous for me. But along the way, I started to not only notice that, but there was these other areas, and especially with points of trauma and with my brother and other folks in the disability community, that there was a large segment of our population that couldn't access the work. Particularly if you're saying you can't have a touch tour, there's no audio description. I was even at an event yesterday where a good friend of mine who's living with blindness was talking about the description of, well, what they're describing, you don't see it, but the description was so great that she saw it, right? So the description was there's furniture being moved. Well, there's no furniture in the room. It's just the description of what will be taking place. But the description was so good for her, she sees this thing. And that's just one of the access points. And so when I think about my responsibility as an artist, I often hold that responsibility to take that very seriously. And that's another thing that Professor Battle really did for me. And she was always on me about responsibility of my image making and these choices that I made as an artist. And there had been no one in my life up until that point that talked to me about that. Like I could just create whatever I wanted to create. And when I think back on that, for me, it felt a little selfish. I think it was necessary to a point, but after that, then I'm like, what am I really doing here? And so when I was able to connect with people in the community that were real experts in fields that I was not, I was able to grow my practice and integrate these things that I feel like I'm getting a little bit better at, providing a level of accessibility in a predominantly visual field. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very challenging. And I mean, it's something that I really appreciate you for helping me think, as the director of a gallery space, like how we can make that part of, our responsibility in practice. And we just had Mara brought an art history class the other day, and they were talking about curating with care and like how to really like put that into action in a space in a meaningful way. And I felt like your show was a great one for them to look at, and that I appreciate especially like immersive installations in the way that they kind of break away from like a white cube gallery space experience where you're walking through and like looking at objects, which again, like I love, but also like it can be helpful to sort of disrupt that a little bit and have again elements that you can pick up and that have different sensations.
Yeah, and I think it could be integrated into curriculum so well. And I think another good question is like, who's not in the room? Who's not showing up for these things and why are they not showing up for these things? Because if the space isn't designed for them or the space isn't speaking to them, then that's why we continually see like decade after decade that we're like nothing's changing. The system seems to be operating the same. And I think that oftentimes we minimize our ability to make huge impacts. And that's one of the things I love about like when people talk about the butterfly effect. I find that kind of line to be true. I've had that experience where I've worked with people and it's like one small thing and then it just has this amazing ripple effect. And at least within our communities, especially now more than ever, I think we need to be asking ourselves that question because we have larger systems at play that are just rolling things back. And I think if we continually look at each other and ask ourselves that question, then within the spaces and the areas that we're at, we can make sure that it's not as intense as it could be.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about the show's title. It's I Am a Multitude. And I think it's an important part of the show. And there's a lot of elements and ways to see this throughout the work. And so I wanted to, give you a chance to say, like, what does that statement, I am a multitude, mean to you in the context of this installation? And how does it maybe apply to a wider, worldview or perspective?
So literally within the space, there's a multitude of things. There's a multitude of blacked out books. There's a multitude of black shears. There's a multitude of sand and grains of sand. There's a multitude of vessels, and there's a multitude of incense. So I wanted to take that literally and operate outside the binary. And also there was a quote, one of my favorite authors is Audre Lorde. And she talks about there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. And that to me harkens back to this experience of, I'll never forget it. And I tell the story very often, but it was pretty polarizing, but it was probably one of the best things that I think maybe ever happened to me was over the phone one day when I was like 13, someone's like, why do you sound white? And I was like, well, what's white sound like? And it's like, what is it? I was really confused. And then when I would go down south, when I was married, when I was here at Drake, they'd be like, oh, you're from up north. So they're talking about what I sound like, and they're relating it to all these, like these intersections of my identity. And so when I thought about that quote, I was like, I'm really struggling right now and having to compartmentalize myself. I am in so many different rooms, and you usually pick it up right away on, if I'm the only person of color there, and that's my constant existence, that's weird. It is a peculiar thing. And I've learned how to be almost a chameleon. And after a while, that gets very exhausting. And so I wanted to, in this exhibition, be like, how, much could I be just me and all the things that are me? And when I do a lot of public work, I'm constantly compromising as well, because you have clients You got to put food on the table, and they want a certain thing. And I'm privileged and blessed to be able to have those commissions. And at the same time, it's a part of compromising who you are. And I think that that's a universal thing in a way where we could all say we've had that experience to some degree, where there's these hats that we kind of take off or put on as a way to navigate and move through the world. And that kind of comes out of our reptilian brain of like fight or flight and like really like socially understanding these spaces that we're in. So for me, that's the side of Black trauma that kind of comes up within the whole exhibition. That's another reason why there's just like a lot of Black everywhere. It's this beauty of Blackness, but it's also trying to kind of be very, very literal about, you know, who I am in a way that allows me to have that for a moment in time where I occupy the minority or majority of the room. Like there's just Blackness everywhere. And so it was kind of like this thing to say that, or to kind of figure out like, what would that experience be like?
Well, and I think you've also incorporated a lot of layers like within the objects too, right? Like these, and this idea of like the hidden and the seen, and that you have books that are covered in Black, and they're both, you know, English books and Braille books, and you know, the transparency is like we can see the image, but it's sort of fleeting, and you know, even the light. I mean, I just think there's a lot of interesting sort of play within the materials and the show itself that kind of gets at this multiplicity, right? Like there's a multiplicity, not only multiples, but to me like a multiplicity and of the way the materials can function, or that we can sort of move through the space, and that there's this play between the interior and the exterior, you know, like even if you're even if your only multiple is just interior and exterior, right? Like that's still a different kind of spaces that you have to navigate, I guess.
Yeah, it is.
And share what are you going to show, and yeah, I really appreciate that throughout the installation.
So this is a black and white image. In the center, there's a young African-American boy, I'll say boy, youth, and he's pointing. In front of him in the foreground, there is one white doll and one Black doll. And this is from Kenneth Clark, and a psychiatrist who was working with his wife, and this is the doll test. So you can find some amazing, a plethora of information online about the doll test. And for me, when this is a history I learned like way later on in life, and knowing that it changed my ability to go to school, right? So it led to, this was done in like the 1940s, like 1939, 1940 was when the doll test started. And so Kenneth Clark was looking at how does segregation impact the psyche, and then how does it impact these areas of self-esteem, internalization. And so the questions that go along with the doll test are pretty straightforward. What's white? What's the white doll? What's the Black doll? What's the good doll? What's the bad doll? Questions like this. And across the board, the youth that were there were with their parents, and the outcome of that was what led to Brown versus Board of Education. So about 14 years later, even though the tests weren't done initially for that reason, they were so polarizing that the NAACP said, we really think that this would help our case. And so those findings were presented and then led to desegregations in schools, which one could argue like our schools really desegregated, but the idea that you have to identify and accept the fact that you've just rejected yourself, for me, is what the doll test is like a big part of Black trauma. When you're asked the question, what's good, what's bad? And you're like, well, the white doll's good and the Black doll's bad. Well, which one looks like you? And then you just identified the fact that you have told yourself you're bad and that you've rejected yourself and you'd rather be this other thing. Epigenetics looks at how does that change our DNA over time, like repeated exposure to these, whether they're microaggressions, real violence, psychological, physical, emotional violence, that can actually and has been found to change one's DNA. And so for me, that's one of the things that I thought, if I'm not there, the image itself can kind of stand in for that whole narrative. Like, I think visually, you would understand that to a certain point, even if you never knew any of the history behind the doll test. And so it gives you a piece of the multitude of what's going on within the exhibition. This is the pattern on the wall that the butterflies move through. So here, there's two images of like the top of a person's head, and it's all graphic design. So it's not like real head, it's a drawing. And then the line of the EEG brain pattern kind of flows a little bit on the left. And then, like Lilah said earlier, it's like a sharp drop, and then it's a sharp spike, and then it's a little bit of a sharp drop again, and then a spike, and it starts to even out. So when doctors were working with within this study, that's the pattern that was coming out when they had this response to what's known as like a deviant sound, just whether that's a startle sound, like a door shutting, and then what's the response and compared to individuals within the study that were identified not to be living with PTSD.
But there's a lot of symbolism to me, and symbols and small kind of things throughout the show that, especially like installing with you, that I felt like I became acquainted with and then thought about, and to me give a more complex view of the installation.
Mm-hmm.
So things like the chain and the bird bath, you know, the incense, the black salt, some of the images on the transparencies, what you chose to include there, the books that you've selected, the plants, and this idea that they kind of get more like dense as you move through, and this the courtyard itself as kind of this entity. And so you know, obviously, you know, probably more than we have time to cover, but if you want to choose some to think about or to kind of expand on some of these symbols and why you chose to put them in.
Yeah, so I can touch on this one, and then there's ones that have like all the books. We had a request for what books were in the exhibition, so there's a list of those. So this image is a split screen. On the left is an image from a sugar plantation in Florida. It's a sundial. In the foreground, it's like white, and then in the background is the plantation house. I visited that plantation in 2021. And then there's these two gold chains on the top of the old sundial. So the sundial doesn't have the actual dial part on the top of it any longer. It's just got the plate on the bottom. And then on the right is the most interior portion of the exhibition. It's full of foliage. There's a book on the wall behind it, and then it's got a gold seal on the wall. So within the courtyard of the exhibition is this introduction into this space where there's the first panel of shears and there's nothing on the ground. And then the second one, it starts to get a little bit more layered, where there's the faux turf and a couple benches. The third one, the turf is gone, and then there's just foliage on the right and the left-hand side. And then behind that is this right here. So it's a set of like deck tiles, and then the foliage has started to overgrow those tiles, and then there's a black bird bath with water, and then those gold chains are inside that, and then they're kind of hanging out like on the sundial. The idea behind interior growth is really what the courtyard is about. Courtyards culturally are used throughout the world, and they used to be very, very common in spaces where like the vegetation was and the climate of the region was a little bit like harsher. There just wasn't, the land did not provide for the growth as much, so maybe more like desert or tundra type of spaces. And the courtyards were used for a couple of different reasons. Primarily, two of the ones that you'll see the most are to bring folks together and to be inside the courtyard year round. And then there's a mental health component that was built into that, where it's helping oxygenate the environment, and it's giving you moments of respite within the courtyard. And they're usually full of growth, and the growth is slightly manicured. Outside this interior courtyard, all the bookshelves have growth, but they're all black. So there's this black growth that moves downward, And then within the courtyard, there's green growth that starts to move upward. I often think about and was exploring the idea of like usually the closer you get internally, or at least I'll speak for myself, when I'm starting to be honest with myself, I'm going to find a whole density of growth that I usually don't pay attention to. And I'm going to find a lot of fertile ground that allows me to get closer to this thing, which is that black book in the back. This thing, whatever that thing might be. And I feel like for myself, that's a lifelong spiritual quest towards more of like this enlightenment in my relationship with my Holy Spirit. And it takes a lot of kind of time to get there. So that's this kind of, and I have to ease myself into it. If I try to go right into that space of healing right away, it's usually really bad for me. So it's this kind of introduction into that. So that's what that's about. And then the bird bath within there and those gold chains I've carried all over. They've been everywhere with me. For this specific site, when we were in Florida, I was working on this series called Two Chains, and I was thinking about enslaved people, and then I was thinking about scripture, and the repetition of the two chains was something that I was finding that was intersectional between scripture and like real world accounts. And so we had not anticipated to find any type of plantation. We went to Florida for a vacation, and I was like, I don't know. It just was like, is there plantations in Florida? Literally, it was just something that I kind of popped into my mind. And to this day, I'm not sure how I really feel about walking on that site. It's almost impossible for me to probably articulate in the short period of time, but it was really deep, and it stayed with me for a long period of time after I left. And so these enter into the space, they enter into water, they enter into growth as sometimes like this last point of internal resistance, where there's all these things that are inside of me that are there to cultivate, to cleanse, to nourish, and yet there's this some type of internal bondage that I'm still always kind of wrestling with. And that's what those two chains are, that are starting to emerge from the bird bath, but still kind of like in the bird bath.
So my last kind of question is, I wanted you to speak about the books that are included, because this was something that had come up, I think, at the opening reception.
Yeah.
People were like, what are the books? Like, how do, what's in them? How do we know, why did she choose them? So I think our last slides are, oh no, we have one more.
That has the books themselves, which are, and then the growth on the bottom. And then I think these last few ones.
Yeah. Do you want me to go ahead? So the last three are all a book list, and I think what we'll do is we'll make this available after this presentation in the gallery, so people can see this too.
So the New Negro, the life, Alan Locke, the caste, the origins of our descent, how the word is passed, a reckoning with the history of slavery across America, Skin Again, Bell Hooks, which is a youth book, children's book. Black Stories, Des Moines Arts Center, 20th Century African American History for Kids, which is original contracted Braille. Black Leaders in Civil Rights Movement, original contracted Braille as well. So contracted Braille, for those of you who don't know, it's like a shorthand version of really commonly used words. So if you're looking to learn Braille by sight, you can do that through uncontracted Braille really easily, because it's going to be like A, B, C. It's going to give you every letter that's in the actual spelling of the word. Where contracted, that you'd be like, well, why is this letter left out? It's because it's the shorthand version. Otherwise, Braille's very, very big, and it's thick, and it just takes up a lot of space. Reporting Civil Rights Part 1 and 2, a two-part anthology of 200 journalistic accounts of the civil rights movement from 1941 to 1973. And then the last slide here is how to see works of art in total darkness. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen, the emotional lives of Black women, W.E.B. Du Bois, data portraits visualizing Black America, the color line at the turn of the 20th century, and under our skin, getting real about race and getting free from fears and frustrations that divide us. Those are the books in the exhibition.
Yeah. So at this point, I want to open it up to our audience. If you have questions for Jill, we have some time to take those.
Question I had is, I'd love to know kind of how you feel this installation is kind of emblematic of where you are in your journey as an artist and how it maybe compares or contrasts with projects you've done along the way getting here.
Yeah, great question. I do and have kind of built a career off of mural work. I started in 1999 with my first mural, and they're kind of my bread and butter. But I'm 45, and I'll be honest, like my body is at a point where I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to do those. If you guys don't know, I mean, they're grueling. And so at this point in my career, I'm really working towards moving to spaces that are much more controlled environments, where my son turned 18 this year, and as a single mother, like it's just, I feel like I've missed out on a lot. So I'd like to be able to transition into more work with gallery spaces and making changes there. Yeah, I would love that.
Well, I witnessed your work at Goodroll Middle School.
Yes.
And that was just so incredible, just seeing how the room, came to be the incredible space it is. And so I'm just curious how, if you could describe your, actually putting this installation together piece by piece, and
Oh yeah.
and how it all, it was just like this.
So Goodwill is a piece that I worked with the Be Well Foundation to do, and I learned a lot from that I actually carried into this installation here. So Lilah and I had started talking about this, and I have to say, like, you trusted me. She didn't ask too many questions until it got rubber meets the road time, and I appreciate that.
Whether that's a good practice or not.
I mean, some people might really like that. I don't like being micromanaged. I've always been someone that you don't need to check on me. I'm going to work at 3 a.m., 4 a.m. regardless. I'm just going to be doing it. But as far as the installation, we spent, I think, probably almost 3 days total with the ceiling and the shears, the first 2 days for sure. So
Yeah.
all of those pieces of wood were cut down, site specific. We did both anchors and nail gun into the concrete
The
ceiling.
Anderson Gallery has a concrete ceiling, which is cool, beautiful, but very difficult when you want to hang and suspend things from it. So when Jill first came in, it was like, I want to hang a curtain down the length of the gallery. I was like, okay. I was like, okay, let me figure out how we can make this happen. So yeah, we have a sculpture tech, Edward, who was really helpful in this. He basically, yeah, went into the concrete, screwed into concrete. So there's one layer of basically plywood into the concrete. And then Jill and I then basically stapled the second, sandwiched the fabric in and stapled that other layer into the other piece of wood. Yeah, and before this happened, I also had to make this straight and drew a line on the ceiling, two perfectly straight
All the
lines
math
on the ceiling. So there was laser levels, chalk lines, all sorts of. It's hard to get a straight line down a 90-foot space.
Yeah.
So.
I feel like when people think about artists, they don't usually add math into the equation, and it's very much part of what we do.
So much math.
There's so much math. Logistics like wildfire. And then when it comes to the height of things, everything is 43 inches from the floor up to the bottom of the work. And that's very intentional for ADA compliance. You could go a little lower than that if you wanted to, depending on how tall the piece is. But oftentimes for folks that are using wheelchairs or folks of different stature, if they're going into a gallery space or museum and they're constantly like this, it lets them know that they weren't thought about. And so there is, you can go online and you can find what some of those measurements are for like a variety of different works, pedestal works as well. So at that point, I just get in a chair and I just roll down each wall and I hang everything the same height. And then the butterflies, we had some amazing student artists, and just
Some of them are
BMAC
not,
students.
not even artists, but basically I have a team of students that works for me at the gallery to greet people, to welcome them into the space, but they were also very helpful in
The
hanging
butterflies.
butterflies, among other things. So, yeah, but it was, I would say
Clipboards.
at least a 3-day and kind of pretty intensive installation. And then there was some things happening, before that. And then obviously, I mean, we were planning this show, much further in advance than that. And Jill had been making drawings and designs, and we had talked, many months before about this, and then kind of checking in throughout. And then the catalog process was something too that is, takes a while leading up to this. And this was actually designed by a graphic design student here, under the mentorship of one of our graphic design faculty. She did a really beautiful job. So,
It's so
those are
good.
downstairs. Please take some. So, and that has the Braille inside as well.
There's QR codes with audio descriptions in there as well.
Other question?
Yeah.
My
Okay.
ethics is on your books, because I was quickly looked real quick, and I know you put a lot of thought into the books, but it also seemed like you put a lot of thought of which books went next to each other.
Yeah. So I tried to create a little bit of a curated experience if you were either reading down each line or maybe just reading the title or going further into the text of each one too, and having a little bit of a narrative that talks about race and disability and the intersection of those things. There's a couple different timelines that are in there as well. So that was the point of each one of them being next to each other. For the Braille books, those are a little trickier because they're very tall. And so when you take a book out, they have a tendency to, and so it can be a little startling. You think it's going to fall off. But I played around with that enough to, I think, get it just right to where they should not fall out of the kind of sides. Yeah.
Is also about the books.
Mhm.
So in seeing the whole list is really helpful, but just in picking them up, I see them as a kind of accumulated wisdom. And I don't know how well I'm gonna be able to ask this question because it's kind of complicated in my head, but I'm wondering about your feeling about the balance between what these books mean to you personally
Mhm.
versus kind of sharing them and having them be educational for others. Because I feel like that balance is very much part of the exhibition as a whole. What is mine that I want to keep
Yeah.
for me? And what is, where do I want to help other people to maybe understand things? And that balance can be very difficult to maintain. So I'm just curious about how you think about, the kind of self protection and
Yeah.
keeping that kind of zone of, these are the things that have been influential to me and have been informative and meaningful to me. And where can I let other people into that? And where
Yeah.
do I want to keep that?
I love that. For me personally, so when I was here at Drake, I went to the library a lot and I found a couple books that had some images that really changed the trajectory of what I was focusing on within my body of work for my thesis work. And then it never really dawned on me, I think, until after I graduated, how difficult it was to actually find books by authors that were, identifying as Black or disabled. I think that really came online like post George Floyd and book banning, when it just like went through the roof. And that's one of the reasons why some of them are also blacked out, like the duality of, you have to look at what's inside because there's no access point on the outside that's going to tell you what the book is actually about. So it kind of forces one's hand in a way if they're curious enough to take that venture. And that to me is the point of, how much do I give, right? And how much am I going to kind of make you work to get to know who I am or what I've dealt with? Because I think there's also a commonality where sometimes we put ourselves out there, we're not received the right way. Somebody doesn't know what to say. It gets used against us. It gets twisted, whatever. And you're like, I really wish I hadn't said that. I really wish I hadn't put that out there. So that's a part of it. And then that's another reason why I don't right away talk about what the pattern of the butterflies is as well, that it's part of the images on the clipboard in the very far back. Because I think sometimes, and I'll just speak for myself, like one of the most impactful losses was the loss of my son, and he passed from SIDS while I was here at Drake, and that was the last exhibition that I did here in the gallery. And I did not think I was going to graduate. I had some amazing professors that got me through it. And, you know, those are the things when I do feel like I'm in community in a safe space that I will put out there, but you're not going to know that that's what I'm dealing with just by watching those on the wall. You're going to get a sense that there's something happening. Again, what's going on with this person? But you really need to spend some time in order to get there. So that was the opportunity for me, and thinking about this as kind of a homecoming to be back here, to be able to put some of that stuff out there and be very intentional about it, but then be restrictive with some of it as well.
So you started, talking about accessibility and trauma, and someone whose scholarship centers on Palestine, I was curious if you could speak at all about what your experience was thinking about those things while at Bardo Quds in like that particular context.
Yeah, well, so I was a Harkin Institute fellow at the time, and Daniel Van Sant was my lead mentor while I was there. And it was one of the very first things that he asked of me to kind of consider. So I didn't have a lot of context around what the students were experiencing, what they were talking about. I was more curious about the students than I was actually being involved in the talk. So we had a PowerPoint presentation. We each kind of talked about art and resistance. We had some art history that was folded into that, but most of the conversation was led by the students and sharing what their practices were, what materials they were using, things that they were experiencing, how they were going about addressing it, and their worries and their concerns. They were very transparent. So for me, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity really to listen more than anything. And I kind of kept in touch with them through like online. So thinking about like, I don't know where they are now, but I can kind of track a little bit about what the college is doing through their online work. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the intersectionalism of being a Black woman, being disabled, and also the trauma that you experienced?
I mean, talking a little bit more about that, like specifically with the exhibition, is that what you're talking about, Jean?
No, I'm talking about as you.
Just as me in general. I think the intersectionality of all of those things is the truth of who I am. And again, thinking back of when I can like be that fullness of that person, this person, that's that kind of peculiarity. Like sometimes there's this disassociation that takes place, within that experience, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I love that book so much, The Souls of Black Folks, because when I think about disassociation happening, after a while, you just don't even realize it's happening. I mean, it is a very peculiar thing. And so I'll exit experiences and be like, I don't remember anything. And so when I was really researching PTSD, oftentimes, I think within the media, it gets skewed. It gets looked at often as one thing and not as intersectional. And I think a lot of times we see it as the heightened responses. Something is loud, and then the person or a dream, these really intense, acute, almost like more violent responses. And for me personally, it's actually the opposite. So there's a dampering that can take place within PTSD response as well. And so you don't necessarily respond to a situation, or you'll block out, for me personally, certain things because it's almost too overwhelming. And then I'm like, someone will be asking me something and I'll be like, So when I was here at university, there's a Cody Dolansek, who used to be an adjunct professor of philosophy and religion, we took a course with Professor Scholz in like philosophy and religion. And I would give him rides home all the time after class because Cody's living with blindness. So I'd take him to work and we talk about class. And I ran into him after I met his wife, like almost 2 decades later. And I was like, I think I know you. You know what I mean? Like, but I had totally blocked out like like almost a decade worth of memories because the trauma that occurred was right before I graduated. And so it's like, I would drive you home and I don't remember. Like, so that would be one thing that it's less acute, but it still happens.
Well, I want to thank you all for the beautiful questions. Thank you for being here tonight. This is the first time I've tried a First Friday event, so thanks for showing up for it, and thank you for Jill. But please give a round for Jill. And again, we invite you. The gallery's just downstairs. It's open if you'd like to look at the exhibition. There's some refreshments there, so have a look, hang out, and thank you so much for being here.